Good afternoon. My name is Reginald Ndogotola, and I'm here to present for professional and community development. Welcome to the contact classes for the August exam. Just to look at the overview of the presentation, we will look at the aim of examination-based contact classes. What is it that we are trying to do with this presentation? Then we'll just look at general instructions that are usually in the exams. We'll look at the unit outline. We'll then look at areas to focus on. Common errors made by students in the examination will also very important. We'll touch on that and just conclude our presentation. So what is the aim of contact classes? The aim of the examination-based contact classes is to help prepare the student for the exam. And this is why it's very important that students study the slides for the preparation as well as prepare. The reason for this is that, as you know, your guide is very thick. And then in addition to the guide being thick, you also have other modules, other subjects. So it's very important that we try to guide you as much as possible without giving you answers to the exam on what to focus more on and what to basically glance over. So basically what we will be doing is giving you a guide on how to approach the examination questions. In general, of course. So the same general instructions for exams. Please write your name clearly, your ID, and state the examination center. It's very important that you clearly state these things. For community and professional and community development, you answer all questions. There are no multiple choices. There are no options. You basically answer all the questions contained in the examination paper. The marks are out of 120. And very, very important, please use the mark allocation for each question as a guide for how many facts are needed and how much to write. For example, if the question is asking, just an example, write 4 principles of community development. That means that the examination paper, the way it's set out, it's also timed. Now, if they only ask you for 4 facts and you go on and write 10, you would come to the end of the examination and find that you did not have enough time to write, to finish answering other questions because you spent so much time trying to write down everything you know about a certain question. So the reason why that question is out of 4 is to make room for other questions. So always remember that the reason, look at the mark allocation. It's not a problem if 4 facts are asked and you write 5. But stick to the mark allocation as a guidance on how much time to spend on a certain topic. And we've seen this in previous exams where students have been asked to write 2 facts and they end up writing 6. That means you spent more time on that question for 2 marks than you were supposed to. So look at the mark allocation just to guide you as to how many facts you need to write down so that you don't spend unnecessary time in writing unnecessary information, quantity of information on one question, and then you don't get time to answer all the other questions or spend as much quality time on other questions as you are supposed to. Please write neatly and legibly. The handwriting is as diverse as human beings. So please, we are not saying that everybody should have the same handwriting, but we are saying is write legibly. Write as if you are writing for somebody to read it. So now some people have cursive handwritings and all sorts of style and all sorts of sizes, but try to imagine that you are writing to somebody else who's going to read it so that you write clearly and avoid scratching, if you make a mistake, 1 line through, just a line that strikes through that sentence or through that word is enough. You don't need to rub out. You don't need to, keep messing up with the paper, just draw a line through it. If you have to, indicate that the answer is down here. But please, try to write as neatly and legible as you can. Consider the thinking level of the verb. If it says explain, that means you expound. If it says state, then you state. If it says describe, then you describe. What we find is that students don't consider the verb. And the verb is very important. And this is where students spend so much time on certain questions. Because if it says state, then you end up explaining, which takes more time. So you don't manage to spend as much time on other questions as you need to. So it's very important that you look at the level of the verb. If it says explain, then you know that you need to explain. If it says state or mention or describe, then you need to do that. Because this is where students lose marks. You will lose marks sometimes because whereas you are asked to explain, you end up mentioning. So you only have one fact. But then the explanation is probably out of 10 points. And then your answer is just mentioned or stated. So then you lose out on a lot of marks. So please, it's very important that you stick to the verb in the question. And you know that in your guide, at the beginning, there's an explanation of all possible verbs. If all of them are not there, and you look at your assignment and you find a verb that's not there, because some of these verbs mean the same thing and they are used interchangeably. So please also make sure that from your assignment you look at the verbs and you understand what those verbs mean. Outline, mention, describe, explain, summarize. Look at these verbs and make sure you understand them, because this is where most of the time students lose marks. Another thing to consider is that the question paper will consist of 7 pages. So always make sure, if you're not sure if you have all the question papers, human errors do creep in. So always make sure that when you get your question paper, you go through it and that all the question papers are attached. Just to make sure, human error happens. So that is your responsibility to make sure that the question paper you got contains all the papers that it's supposed to. Because we are all human and human errors do creep in. Remember, cheating in the exam will result in a failing grade, and we have previously noted that there are students that you can see that this answer is copied from the other student, word by word. So be careful, because if you get caught, you're in a lot of trouble. So what are some of the common errors made by students in the examination paper? So I've mentioned one, the mark allocation, where you are asked to clearly to state 5 facts, you go on and state 10 facts. As much as you don't really lose marks on that, the thing is that it counts against you. Counts against you because you spend time on one question paper, whereas you could have spread out your time on all of them. So that's one that I previously mentioned that you might not pick it up here. And the other one that we start with is the words, the verbs. Please, very important, look at the verb. If the verb says define, that means give a meaning of the word that is stated there. What you find is that you find students explaining. They explain and they expound on it, but they don't define. An example that I've given in this slide, just because I cannot give you the ones that are in the exam, and I also cannot in any way insinuate on the questions in the exam, is define the term water. Just an example. So that means give the meaning of what is water. Give the meaning of water. What is water? So you find students explaining that water is used for drinking, is used for washing. Just an example. Whereas you're supposed to be what is water, where you can say this is a substance that or leaving things taken and all that. Just as an example to say, what is the difference between define and all the other verbs? So it's very important that people understand. So one of the errors that I've picked up is that students don't know what is define. As long as they know something, they start writing without considering how to answer the question. So how to answer the question is just as important as what you write down. The other one is list mention. Very important. You need to know these words. You need to know all these verbs that I've listed here. You need to know them because some of you might know them, but I do not take it for granted because experience has shown that there are students who do not understand these verbs. If someone says list is the same as mention. So you just list, you just state it. You don't explain, you don't expound, you just list whatever facts you are asked. If the question says explain, that means give more details. And sometimes explanations include definitions, but they are not limited to definitions. And that's where the difference between explain and definition lies. Definition is that you basically give the meaning of that term or the word or the concept. But when it comes to explain, you might include the definition, but as well as more details and expound on that concept, so that the other person has an understanding of what it is that you are explaining. So that's the differentiation between explain and definition. Explain, you expound, which might include the definition, but not limited to the definition. But definition, you give the meaning. Differentiate. That's another word that I sometimes find that students struggle with, that some students struggle with. So to differentiate is simply clearly show the difference. Contrast, even though that word is not used, but another word for differentiate is contrast. That means show the differences, differentiate. So what happens sometimes, students just show the similarity and not differentiate. So you need to show the differences, but looking at the same characteristic. So if someone says differentiate between a cup and a plate, you don't want to say, okay, one you drink from, the other one you place your food on. You don't want to look at two different characteristics. So you basically, let me just repeat that. You basically look at the same characteristic and contrast those characteristics. A cup is used to drink, a plate is used to hold or place food on. But then what you have is students, for example, saying a cup is green and a plate is used to eat from. So those are two different qualities. So how do you show the differences with two different qualities? So you want to look at the same quality and explain how both of them differ on the same quality or the same characteristic. And then describe. Describe means give characteristics. And this is where students sometimes mix up describe and explain. And I can understand why they mix it up, because there were two words. In many cases, they have a lot of overlap, but they are not the same words. They don't have the same, they don't ask for the same expectations. So explain, like I said, you expound, you give more details, just to make the person understand what that is. So you show understanding. To describe, you give characteristics. For example, explain what this is. You might want to say, this is a pen. Like I said before, that an explanation can include a definition, but it's not limited to a definition. So this is a pen, it's black, used for writing, it's purchased from a shop, it's used by teachers. You know, you can say all these things just as an example, but then when it comes to description, when they ask you to describe something, you look at the physical or the characteristics. Yes, this is a pen, it's black, it's pointy, it's long. That is a description. So you look at characteristics. But explain, you might even look at functions and such things. But when it comes to to descriptions, you describe something. What is it? What does it do? How does it look like? And then what does it do? It comes in together with the function. It's long because it writes. So you need to be able to give a description. How does it look? That's basically a description. What is the outlook, if we can put it that way? But then students mix up describe and explanation. So describe, you give the characteristics. Explain, you go into details. You might include definitions, whatever it is. And even sometimes in the description, if the description, the characteristics is linked to what it is, then you mention it. But you have to be very careful and understand that the two are different. And then outline. This is a tricky one because from what I've seen from students in the previous exams and assignments, students are asked to outline and they just go on and explain, and they write long essays. But what you're supposed to do is give an overview of something. It's not as, an outline is not as detailed as an explanation. So a question that asks you to explain, you give more details. You expound on things. You take things apart and then you show your understanding. You give more detailed descriptions and more detailed explanation. But with outline, you just give an overview. So you go tup, 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 tup. Whereas an explanation, you go just that's an illustration. I know it sounds comical, but this is basically what happens, the difference between outline and explain. Because sometimes students would mix the two up. So don't forget that when you're asked to outline, you just give an overview of something. And remember, just to give an example, when I started this presentation, I gave an overview of this presentation. So I didn't go into details. I just said we'll be looking at this and this and this and this. And that's an example of an outline. You don't go into details, but you just sketch the surface. And you indicate the main features of something in a concise and systematic manner. Like I said, tup, 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 tup. So that's an outline. Whereas in an explanation, you have full sentences, you have long sentences, and you have things that are detailed. Moving on. Moving away from the verbs, I want to look at another error that is made by students, another mistake that students make in the examination. It has to do with concepts in the subject itself, professional and community development. We come across concepts and terms, and these terms might be terms that students have never come across, and so sometimes they mix them up. Students would mix up the terminologies and the concepts. And there might be others, but I've actually just noted some few ones. So this presentation is not limited to what is here. So when you study, it's not limited. If you see that you don't know the difference between certain words, get a dictionary, Google it, and know the differences. Because it comes out when you try to explain things. And then I would put a question mark like, what do you mean by this? And I know what the student wants to say, but because I've marked so many scripts on that topic, but it's not correct the way it stands on the paper. So I cannot be unjust and give you a mark simply because I know or I feel or I know what you're trying to say, but you have not said it. Yes, in the assignment, one can do that, but it's stricter, the marking is stricter in the exam. So it's very important that students understand that when you don't know certain terminologies, look them up before you write the exam. In fact, when you are studying, as a student, one of your tasks is to have a dictionary by your side and look up the words. Because students would call and say for assignments, why did you not mark me for this? And I'm like, but that's not what the word means in the context that you've used it. So what are these terminologies that students mix up? Community development and professional development. That's the first one. So sometimes a question is like, what is community development? And students say it's professional development. Or they would give a definition for professional development. And I know that the confusion is because of the word development in both concepts. Community development, professional development. So the concept here that gets students mixed up is the word development. So there is a difference. These are totally two different things. Please look them up. Community development refers to the process of getting communities involved in their own development by getting an expert involved, whether it's a teacher or the teacher facilitate the community development, but look up the definition in your guide. And then professional development is the development of a teacher in their professional roles. That's just an easy, but there is the guide with the definition. So this is just an outline, but the professional development, the term professional development refers to basically the development of the teacher professionally, reading up more, doing your further studies, those kind of things. But remember, what I'm saying here is not what you should write in the exam. What I'm giving you is an informal definition, but the formal definition is in the guide. Please use those and learn the differences. This is just an easy illustration. The other concept that students get wrong is teaching profession values and the values of professional development. These are the two concepts that are in the guide. And students mix them up. Many students mix these two up. And it's just for you to be on the lookout. So the question might not be about that, but you might need to use that concept in your answers. And because you have read it up, you might end up using it wrongly. So the difference, teaching profession values. What are the values of the teaching profession? And what is the value or the importance of professional development? So here again, the concept, the key word being values. So you need to understand that just like any other language, English has words that has synonyms, that have words that have the same meaning, but they are different depending on the context. And values is one of those words that have a double meaning. And what I mean by this, just to give an example of a word that has a double meaning, is the word bank. A bank is a place where you get money or where you store your money, but the bank can also mean a bank of a river, the edges of a river. So it depends on in what context it's used. So it's very important that you don't mix up the words, especially the words that are used in the guide to mean different concepts. Another word, code of conduct and conduct of teachers. We all know that the code of conduct refers to the codes or the behaviors that are outlined on how teachers should conduct themselves or any other profession. And conduct of teachers refer to the behavior of teachers. So the word code is not understood in this concept. So it's very important that students watch out for some of these concepts, because many times students are mixing them up. So please use a dictionary, Google it, but understand so that when you answer your questions, you don't misuse the concepts. Okay, so let's go, like I said in the outline, we'll be looking at units and just looking at what you need to pay attention to. Like I said, the guide is big, and if you try to tackle that guide for the exam, you are going to exhaust yourself, and there are things that you might lose in the process of preparing yourself for the exam. There are things that you miss in the process of preparing yourself for the exam. So without giving you questions, let's look at some of the things that are covered in the exam. Now, I should say a word of caution. The way they appear here might not be the way they appear in the exam. So what we try to do with the exam is to test students' understanding of the subject. So the question might come in the form of a scenario. It might come in the form of define or explain or whatever it is. So you need to ready yourself to understand this, because what you have is students memorizing. And it doesn't matter how the question looks like. They just take it straight from the guide onto the exam paper. They answer it exactly as it is in the exam. And this is where students miss marks, because the exam is not supposed to test how much you can memorize. The exam is supposed to test how much you understand or you understood from the subject or the module. So this is something that students need to be aware of. Because students will call, why didn't I get an 80%? I studied. Yes, you studied, but did you understand what you were studying? Okay. But did you understand what you were studying? So it's very important that when you look at these issues that are taken out of the units, that you understand them and not just memorize them. So let's look at from Unit 1. We want you to look at professional roles and responsibilities of teachers relating to functions. Now, you all know that the functions are related to teaching, the school, the community, the learner. So understand the different functions and where they fit in. Know and understand the criteria for any job to be regarded as a profession. What are the criteria for any job to be regarded as a profession? So when this question comes, students, if you just memorize, you will not know where to place it. So look at the word criteria for a profession. What are those criteria? Understand why teachers are called professionals. Why are teachers called professionals? What is it that makes teaching a professional? You need to look at the definition of professional development and its benefits and values to teachers and learners. Like I said, for you to answer this question, you need to understand what is professional development and its value or its benefits. Know what a mentor is and the duties of a mentor as well as a mentee. Unit 3, look at computer-based technology. Understand its advantages and disadvantages and the importance of computer-based technology. And you remember that computer-based technology is actually any of these devices that use softwares and can be laptops, cell phones, any of these devices that we are using these days, tablets, Kindles, CPU, whatever, any of those. That's what we refer to as computer-based technology. So what is the disadvantage and the advantage of some of these things? Challenges that the Namibian teachers faces in the teaching profession. We know that teaching in Namibia is not easy, and there's reasons why teaching is not an easy profession, because the teacher will encounter challenges. Unit 4, know the concept community development. The name of the subject is professional and community development. So the first thing to understand before you can understand anything else in this subject is the terms professional development and community development. So this is very important, and this is why the question keeps being repeated. Know and understand the aptitudes that are important for principals and teachers to become effective leaders and change agents. Very important. Please understand that in order for you to answer it in the exam, because it comes out as practical. The principles of community development, the teachers and the school's responsibility in addressing poverty. And please, when you answer, if you come across this question that relates to poverty, try to be as practical as possible. Looking at Unit 5, definitions and explanation of what emotional intelligence is. What is it? How do you tell this person is emotionally intelligent and the other person is not emotionally intelligent, or have low and the other person has high emotional intelligence? And please, look at those words. They are verbs that are used to describe, for example, high emotional intelligence as well as low emotional intelligence. Happy. When we say a person with high emotional intelligence is happy, just as an example, what do we mean that the person is happy? Does that mean the person doesn't get problems? What does that mean? So what I've seen in the past is that students understand the word, but when it comes in the context of emotional intelligence, they cannot describe or explain that word with regard to emotional intelligence. Yes, to be happy is to feel good. Yes, but what does that mean connected to emotional intelligence? This is just an example. Or low emotional intelligence, when we say that someone is a repressor or upbeat denial. What does that mean in the context of emotional intelligence? So you need to understand those words and concepts. Understand what assertive communication is. You should be able to define it and look at what is its advantages and what is its disadvantages in order for you to answer the question. And then look at the characteristics, like I say, of low and high emotional intelligence. Apart from being able to define it and explain it, you need to know the characteristics and be able to know the meaning of those words. Even though it says happy, what does it mean to be happy in the context of emotional intelligence? And then Unit 6, the second last unit, know what the curriculum vitae is. The CV, we know that we call it CV, but if you come in the exam and it's written curriculum vitae, know that it means CV. What is it and what is its purpose? Interview skills, there are do's and don'ts of the interview. So what are the things that you're allowed to do and what are the things that can count against you if you go for an interview and you do some of these things? How to write a letter of application. Now we all know by this time that you are expected to analyze a covering letter. So look at how the explanation in the guide that tells you this is how a covering letter should look like, so that you can analyze that covering letter that's provided in the exam. Because many times students would answer this question, there is no date. Yeah, there's no date, so what? So you should be able to write a proper analysis. A covering letter is supposed to have a date. This letter does not have a date. What I've seen is that students have analyzed answers from the assignment. Know this. These covering letters are different. So the one that's in the assignment is not the same one that's in the covering letter. So sometimes the student will say, this covering letter does not have a date and it's supposed to have a date. And I look at the covering letter and it has a date. So this is something you cannot memorize. This is something that you need to understand to be able to do an analysis of a different letter in the exam. So please just get that, because these are marks where you can easily get marks, but because of this simple error, students end up losing marks. And lastly, the last unit, how to start a business. Explain the term entrepreneurship. What is it? And sometimes students will give me an explanation except for the keyword. It's about being business-oriented. So the rest of an entrepreneurship should be strong, should be innovative, but you did not define the word entrepreneurship. So even if the rest of the things you said are correct, the fact that there's no concept of business in that explanation, I can give you marks. So it's very important that when you look up the definition, you understand it instead of just describing it. Steps to start your own business, they are clearly outlined. The steps are clearly outlined. I can't remember what the question is all about, but students would most of the time just get things from somewhere else and lose out on a lot of marks. So the steps are in the book. How you are asked to apply them in the exam is something else. So in conclusion, study to understand. It's not enough to memorize. Read that question, understand what the question is asking of you, and then look at the mark allocation. And then, only then, after that, can you start writing. Because it's very important that you are prepared for the exam. But many times students have read, but they have not understood. They have read, they understood, but they did not look at the mark allocation. Sometimes students read, they understand, they look at the mark allocation, but then they don't take into consideration the verb. So in conclusion, please study and study to understand and take into consideration all these errors that are pointed out so that you don't repeat them and lose marks unnecessary. And I thank you for this session and good luck with your exam.